Hello. We are departing from our regularly scheduled crafting vlogs to do a long and serious talk about mental health. Yay! And basically to reflect on a really terrible experience that I had and talk through some of my process and some things I've been going through with therapy. Not recently, everything's sort of a couple of years ago, but this video's been rattling around in my head for a long time, and I've decided that it's time to just let it out so I can stop thinking about it and just let it exist as it is. So I'm going to try and do it in sections. My video editing skills have not progressed much. It's a little good, but it's probably just going to run sort of as is. I'll take breaks if I need to while filming. Please do the same if you're anybody watching this, especially if you're a little bit sort of unwell yourself and you're looking at this for mental health content, if it's sort of come up on your algorithm. I may comfort craft if I need to, so you might see my hands knitting if I feel the need to. I'm going to try not to, but also if I have to, I have to. Content warning up at the start. This whole video is about mental health. This whole video is talking about me reflecting on my own experiences of mental health, finding explanations for kind of what I went through, why I reacted the way that I did, and like bringing that all out just from my own like personal experiences. I don't know if it's going to be obvious looking at this as well, but I trained to be a therapist as well, like after this experience had happened a few years ago. So a lot of the therapy that I was doing was while I was also training. So this is very like mental health deep dive, own sort of spiritual work that you do. Spiritual work? Your own sort of reflective work that you do. I suppose some of it's spiritual. So I will be talking about my own experiences in quite detail with suicidal thoughts. I didn't make any attempts, and there's no kind of graphic self harm. I don't, aside from eating a bit of cake, and like having a bad diet, and it's not like disordered eating sort of level bad diet or anything like that. I don't do any self harm behaviours, so none of that's going to be sort of explored. So, with that intro over, let's start with section number 1, the job. So in 2015, I started a job, and I'm going to be using everyone's real names and stuff because fuck those guys. This was a terrible experience, and come at me, bro. If anything happens, it happens. So I was working for the NHS. I was working in an NHS office. The job had been fine. I'd kind of outgrown it. I'd grown for a year, and so I did what's known as a naked resignation, which is not as exciting as it sounds. I handed in my notice without another job to go to. The office was moving. I didn't want to move with it. It was just slightly more inconvenient, and it was like, this is the time to go. I probably should have gone already. So that job was ending right at the end of March. And I had a whole load of job interviews that I got kind of sorted out sort of around the middle of March. And I got one, and it was at Hampshire County Council in a team called Hampshire Futures. And this is the worst job I've ever had in my life. And I've been the person that sits outside holding a sign for a piercing shop in the cold. I have done sex work. I've worked for the council. I've worked for the NHS during COVID. Like this is the worst job I've ever had, bar none. So I got the job offer kind of early March. I think it was maybe like the 5th or something like that. Like on the Friday, I accepted the job. And so I was like, oh, cool. I've got till the end of March on my current job. And then I'll start up with this one. And if I have a week or something gap, that'll be fine. And like all of the initial shit started. I will be swearing throughout this. All of the initial shit started with them just not processing my application particularly well. Like, I brought my passport into the interview, and then they made me bring it in again because, I don't know, they'd lost it, which is a bit that's some pretty sensitive personal data that you've taken and then lost to not process for the criminal records check. So I, had to take that back in again. And then there was like an issue with the HR department because they just changed it to this like massive centralized thing where one of my references emails had bounced back and they just hadn't followed it up and they hadn't asked me about it and they hadn't tried to phone the reference because like the number was correct. They hadn't asked me for anything and I chased because it was getting to the point of like, I haven't heard back and like I'm getting to the end of this notice period and I really would have expected to start by now. This, for like my experiences with like public services and starting work, like it can take a little bit if you have to run a records check before you take someone in, but it's like 4 to 6 weeks is usually pretty sufficient, you know. So I eventually found out that it was this references thing. It all got processed and I started in the I think it was the 11th of May. This was 9 years ago now, so that is a bit of a guess, but I think it was the 11th of May. So I turned up on my first day. Someone else was also there. They didn't say that it was more than one person was going into the role, but we both started at the same time and she was lovely. And we did some work together and stuff. And basically the job that they'd said that we were going to be doing was advising young people how to get into employment education and training, which is something that I've been doing before as a volunteer and was exactly the kind of job that I wanted to go into. And like no one knew why we were there and people kept asking us what our job was, and beyond that like generic thing, like it's quite tricky when you go in somewhere to know really how you fit in, and no one could tell us like how we kind of fit into the team. And I went and asked one of like the senior manager that was in the department, and like the office that I just come from was like really flat, like a really flat hierarchy structure. You just went up to the person and you spoke to them or you emailed them or whatever. So it wasn't weird for me to be like, yeah, let's just go and talk to the head of department. And the manager was horrified that I'd spoken to him. I was like, oh, you don't do that. And it's like, why not? He's just a guy in an office. Like, he's there. I want to know if he's done the hiring decision. That's what it is. And he gave us a better explanation of where it fit in with everything and all of that. And so we started up on some training and kind of got our heads a little bit around what we're doing. We were doing all the mandatory e-learning, which you have to do if you start any public sector job in the UK anyway. Probably a whole load of other ones like how to do manual handling and to make sure that you're going to follow the Data Protection Act, GDPR now. At the time it was data protection still. And just confidentiality and all of those kinds of things around working with people in public sector. So we were kind of getting on with that, and we were meeting the people we were going to be working with and like putting it in sections and stuff. And like they had a couple of spreadsheets that they wanted us to work on. So there was this database of young people, and that's defined as people kind of aged 16 to, I think it was like 16 to 20. And then like up to 25 if you were somebody with a disability, because then you still counted as a young person. So they had this database and they had these spreadsheets. There were like 3 different classifications of young people in this area, and it's for Hampshire, so like a big county. One of the classifications is like in employment education or training. Like these people are fine, they're in college doing courses, they're in schools, they're doing like their A-levels, they're in apprenticeship schemes, they are sorted, they're in somewhere. There's not an employment education and training, which is maybe they've dropped out of school and they're kind of wandering around. Maybe they've got some issues around like care or housing or something else that means that they're struggling. So they might need kind of the support of some other schemes. We've got things like the Prince's Trust, where you can kind of go and get a little bit of work experience, a little bit of education, and kind of be a lot more kind of physical with the activities that you're doing. There's a little bit of kind of volunteering aspect to it. It's a good scheme. For the people that have like been on it, and there were some that we ran internally as well. So those people were to be kind of contacted and encouraged to go into something which suited their needs as best as possible. And then there was this big category in the middle called unknowns, and that was the area that I ended up working with pretty much the entire time I was there. And that was like, they're not showing up as being like sorted. they might be in either of these categories, and we need to know whether they're fine and we don't need to worry about it, or whether they need some help, which all kind of sounds sensible. But it was this just like massive spreadsheet, and we were just cold calling people. We would just phone up people and be like, hey, you're not showing up anywhere. And they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm in this college and I'm slightly out of area. I've gone to uni and we no longer have access to the UCAS data, so we now don't get any feedback for anyone that's gone to uni. So everyone that was in uni was in the, because like it's 18 to 20, everyone that was in uni was in this unknown category because we didn't have that data, and all of the information that we had in the spreadsheet that might line up to put people there, like in the database, was all to do with like how they were in primary school. So it was like the address you had when you were 4, or like maybe 11 or whatever. But like if you like 10 years on, maybe you live somewhere else now. People change their name, and people like registered with different names, and we had all this daft stuff coming through, like if your primary school like record had you down as like Samantha, and then you'd registered at college as Sam, which is very obviously like a linked name, and if you've got the same address and date of birth and phone number like listed on both, I would say that you could probably assume that that is the same person, even if you have to go through manually. But they wouldn't let us do that. So we were doing this cold call of just this massive, massive, massive sheet. And I was trying to work it out, like, on a really good, dedicated day, you could, like, maybe make 20 phone calls as a person. And it's like, even with, like, loads of us working on this full time, which, like, we weren't, for weeks and weeks, like, and the amount that, and assuming that everyone answered and came off that list, like they were all doing something, and so they were all put onto one of the other lists. Even if you did that, we were never going to get through it. It was going to be like 8 or 10 weeks, assuming no one else got added onto the list, because obviously other people will be turning 16, and it might be like, well, they're in college for 2 years, so we're going to put them down as like being in college for 2 years, and then they become unknown again if they've not like registered somewhere else, and it's going to come up like that. So it was an impossible task. It was something that was never going to get to the end of, and this felt very daft to me. And also, like, I've explained this and I've come out with this and I said this to other people and I just kind of didn't get it. They're like, oh, whatever, just do it anyway. Like, I kind of get it, but it's like, maybe we can be improving the process. Maybe we can do this kind of like, well, that's every part of their details are the same except they're now registered as Sam. Maybe we don't need to call them, and we can just do that. And like, I just got no, we can't change any of the systems. Like, they seem to be really upset with me trying to kind of create any links between teams. So the organisation I'd come to before had a lot of things talking about siloed working, and how that ends up being that you like repeat a lot of stuff. So Team A puts together a tool for tracking young people. Team B needs a tool for tracking young people, and so they build their own, which is then obviously like duplicating work, and they won't talk to each other and things like that. Whereas if you maybe had like good informal links between people as well as kind of formal links or joint meetings or whatever, it might be like Team A makes their tool, and Team B mentions needing a tool, and Team A goes, oh, we've got something, why don't you do what we've done? And it makes the whole process kind of more efficient and easier and better. And in like the previous organisation, it was like, oh my gosh, please do that, make as many links as possible, that's going to be the best thing. And I was really good at that. So I like brought that, and I was like, I've got really good experience of doing this, because it's something, I'm very chatty and very social, I will talk anyone's ear off, and I'm really genuinely just interested in what other people are doing. Like, regardless if it's like a boring thing, like, or like whatever the topic, I am interested and I want to know. So I brought all that, and it was all just like shut down. Like, no, don't want you talking to the data team. We don't want you doing it. It's like, even though it was going to just get rid of all, and I couldn't work it out, and this seemed just so daft. And I was saying, like, I've come in to this job expecting you to be like, I've got this young person and they need your help. Will you go and sit with them and work with them and help them explore options and write a CV with them, kind of work that I'd done before, and like have a caseload and keep track of them and be their guy in the council that's going to like help them. And that just wasn't happening. I was cold calling people off a spreadsheet. And we had to go and like, at some point we had to go and knock on people's doors. And this was the best because I used to do this with Dave and he was really grumpy about everything in a way that was just hilarious to me. And like, he was a really nice colleague to have. Like in the whole department, Dave was really nice to work with because I hated everything and couldn't understand why everyone else didn't hate everything, and Dave also hated everything. So he would just be grumpy at me, and then like when I was grumpy, I'd be like, "Oh, I'm really disappointed at the whole process. I haven't been allowed to talk to the data team." He's like, "Well, they're shit, aren't they? It's just everything in here is shit." like, and that was just really validating in a way that other people weren't. And also Kate and Sarah, who worked in like the website design team. They were lovely. I'm still friends with Kate. I'm gonna go and see her on Sunday. Um, those were my people, and they were like, "Yeah, I see what you're talking about. Everything is mad." Um, and this frustration, like I'd gone in expecting to be there for a couple of years, and job searching sucks. Job searching sucks so much, and I'd just done a job search, and I'd started up at this job, and I hated it, and I kind of knew about 2 months, or even less. Like I needed to go. It wasn't right. I needed to like not be there. But I'd started this job thinking I was going to be there for a couple of years and then really get going with my career and look at going back to uni and all of that. And I was just so like frustrated and upset that I would have to go back to job searching. And it just felt really inevitable as well, and really upsetting that I would have to leave this job. It wasn't right. I've been really struggling to find something with like a helping profession like this, and it seemed like it was such a good fit. And I turned down the other jobs that I'd been offered. I had three offers. One was like an IT job, and there was this one at the council, and there was an NHS one that actually like might have been good. I don't know, but like it wasn't. I wasn't doing the thing that I wanted to do that I'd been promised to do, and I felt really trapped. We were saving up for a house deposit for this house. um, so I got there in the end, but like with my partner's able to like afford rent, so and like all of the household bills pretty much just by themselves. So by like my income was all what the house deposit was doing. So if I wasn't earning, then one I had to live off like whatever savings, but like if I wasn't earning, we weren't saving for a house deposit. We weren't saving to get out of the crappy flat with a crappy landlord and stuff. It wasn't that bad, but also, renting is terrible, just universally. And like I felt like I had to stay there, and I had to be in work, and I felt like embarrassed that I'd got myself into this really hideous job, and so it was like, oh, I won't. I'll procrastinate on doing the job searching, and I can't. And like the longer I stayed, and the more helpless and trapped, and the more people just seemed to not get it. Like the less motivated I was to do literally anything. Um, and a couple of months in, I stopped being so motivated to go out and do things outside of work because I mean, most of what my hobbies were like internal, like in the home. So I was baking and things like that, and I stopped baking, and I stopped painting my nails because I was doing quite a lot of nail art at the time. I kept going to pole dancing classes. That was something that lasted until like final 2 weeks, basically in that role. That was I still went and saw Blaze Bailey anytime he was in the area because he played Winchester quite a lot, and we were pretty close friends at the time. We're still friends, but not as close. And I would go out and see him to like see my buddy, and he was only playing sort of. I think I saw him twice, so like, I went to 2 gigs, and yeah, I went to weekly classes, and I didn't do anything else. I stopped going to acro yoga, which I'd kind of been going on and off but it just became off. I didn't go out. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't motivated to do anything. I wasn't cooking dinner. My partner cooked at the time, so like I'd just come home and be sad and despondent, and I stopped caring about anything. So my partner would be like, "Hey, do you want to go and do this?" or "What do you think about this?" And I wouldn't care. I didn't care was the honest answer. So amongst that, I started to have some intrusive thoughts, and this is where the story is going to get a little bit darker. I was working in Totton the first time since I was about 14 that I had a self-harm thought, and I was stood on the corner and a truck came down the road, and in a very like clear voice inside my head I heard, "You could jump in front of that." And I was fucking terrified. Like, where the hell did that thought come from? What is going on? I hadn't wanted even the most idly to be hit by a car since I was like a teenager and edgy and hormones and thoughts and feelings and emo era, and lots of my friends managing like mental health stuff as teenagers. And anytime I go past that, like in recent years when I go past that corner, like sometimes, like the first time I went past years and years later, I went and sat at that corner for a bit and thought about how happy I was that I wasn't in that place anymore, because it got really, really dark. At work, I was just trying to avoid. Everything is avoid. With me, that was the way that I was working, just kind of run away from it as much as possible. We were running away from job searching for a new job, and I was just trying to avoid being in the nasty situations. I didn't want to be told off for not doing the work. I didn't want to do the work. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to, like, if you don't want me to change the world, then I won't. I'll just sit and hide. So I would hide in the basement office with Sarah and Kate. I would just try and be out of the way and not engage with anything as much as possible. And I just wouldn't say about how I was feeling or what was going on, and I just hide. And I spent some time working like in Totton and in Eastleigh and Winchester. Like Winchester was the main office with all the managers and stuff. And I spent some time working in Totton, which is where I'd had that thought. And they were like, since we've noticed that you're struggling a bit, because I did say in my supervision that I was struggling, we're going to move you out of the Totton office. You have to come and work in the Winchester office. So you'll be under closer supervision. And I was like, I'm losing my place to hide. I got taken away from Dave with that, and I had to go and sit with Barbara, who was a nightmare to work with. She's probably retired by now. She was close to retirement when I was working with her. It's been almost a decade. But she was really difficult. Loads of people, like no one really understood what I was going through, apart from like some people. I can't remember her name now, but someone else that worked in the Totton office was really lovely, and she got it. But most people, they didn't understand it, and weirdly they then got quite aggressive about it, of like I'm really upset, I really finding it difficult to do this work. Well, why? Like, just deal with it, like that sort of thing. And there wasn't a just leave. One of the other ways that I tried to get out was to do what's called a secondment. So I went to try and work at a team that my friend works at. She's still there. She complains about it a lot, and like it is bad, but like they were looking for people within the department, and it was like, okay, so the funding system, basically you go and work for another team and then you come back. And I went in for the interview, and they were like, have you got approval from your manager? And I was like, I haven't asked yet, but I'm sure they'll approve it, because I'm not doing anything at this job and I'm not very good at it and whatever. And they didn't fucking approve it. They said no, because we think you're trying to leave. Fucking let me go then. Why would you keep me here when you know I want to go? Like, Just let me go and do something else. And like the weirdest thing, like it was such a weird office culture, and the culture of that office was if you wanted to go, you left. you you just left and didn't turn up one day, which is absolutely cuckoo bananas. I've never been anywhere else like it, where like that is just the way that people go. One person that like worked in a slightly different team, and we occasionally shared an office with her because there was lots of hot desking and stuff, like she just went on holiday and didn't come back. She and like I asked about it casually, like, oh, like how's this person? Like, she was away for a couple. I thought she was only going to be away for a couple of weeks, and they were like, we don't know what's going on. And she freaking sent me an email weeks later, like saying, "Oh hey, and I hope everyone's doing well in this office. I'm sat near that data development team," um, and like I mentioned it to one of the managers, the one that said we don't know where she is, and went like, "Oh, I saw she's working in this team," and they were like, "Is she?" Like she'd fully just switched jobs without telling anyone. And like, you know what? I wish I had. She wasn't the only one that had done that. Dave had done that. Dave had just not turned up for 10 months. It was madness. It was wonderful. But like, yeah, the thought of doing that is weird, but like also a lot of people did it. And I see why. So slowly getting more and more trapped. I mentioned that I spoke to my supervisor, and when I initially spoke to her I said like I've been feeling really bad, and my experience, one of the volunteer things I'd done before was working in an IAPT service, so improving access to psychological therapies, which does telephone counselling for people with depression and anxiety. And so I did some paperwork with them. I listened to some sessions because people knew I was interested in becoming a psychologist. And so I was like, I have symptoms of depression. And she's like, are you sure? You know, you're feeling sad? And it was like, no, like I've been in a service where they treated depression, and I am feeling depression. Like that is what I am experiencing. I am feeling less motivation. I am upset. I have a really weird appetite. I was still trying to cook. I was making myself food that I then couldn't eat, and then I was having a lot of like negative thoughts about the fact that the food had gone to waste, and like I was trying to do self-care and it was so bad, and it was just I just bought lots of biscuits, and I was like, I'll just eat biscuits until I'm not hungry, and that'll like at least I'm not hungry then. Like that was the level I was functioning at one point. And initially my boss, Emma Gotts, who I'm going to just name fully, was really sympathetic, and she was like, I understand, we're gonna like I'll support you, and we'll give you help while you're here. It's really important to talk about your feelings. It's okay to not be okay, like hashtag energy. And I was crying, and she gave me some tissues, and it all seemed really sweet. And we had another catch up a month later, and she said, how are you feeling now? And I went, are you feeling better? And I went, honestly, if anything, I'm feeling worse. And her response was like, why haven't you got over it, basically? Like, she had no patience for this. It was that kind of aggressive thing. She was mates with Barbara. She thought Barbara was great. And they had just like the same thought of like, I don't know what Barbara thought about my mental health struggles. I never spoke to her about them. But it was that same thing of just like, why haven't you dealt with this? Why haven't you got over it? Like, I have a department to work for. And it was just that like, oh, okay, so you were going to be sympathetic and like an ally and a supporter, but now I see that you're not. And I opened up and I said, I've had some suicidal thoughts. I've been worried about driving into work because I have to drive down the motorway. And I've been having some scary thoughts. I've been having thoughts about driving my car into traffic. I had one day where I signed myself off sick on the online system, and I said that I had stomach issues, but the reality is I thought if I get into a car, I cannot guarantee that I will get to my destination safely, and I think it's probably better that I stay home sick. Because I was sick. I was having a mental health crisis, which maybe I hadn't kind of seen at the time. And like she said, oh, do you want me to refer you to occupational health? And I was like, yes, I want that. like, I need help. Have you seen the doctor? And I said, I feel like a GP is going to refer me to the IAPT service, give me medication or sign me off. And I've already referred myself to the IAPT service. I think you're second guessing a doctor. You should go to the doctor and like find out. I'm like, okay. I went when I was ready, and she took a full month before she sent me to occupational health. And I told occupational health, like, I am having symptoms of depression. And I said, what's happening? It's like, I'm having some thoughts around self-harm. I'm feeling really emotional. I cry in my car on the way home from work. I'm having to do all these additional things to like try and comfort myself. I wear my favourite hoodie in the car to try and not feel sad. And I'm really struggling. So it's like, oh, so you're feeling emotional. It's like, I'm feeling depression. I'm experiencing depression. I know what symptoms of depression are. And that is what I am going through. And they did fuck all. I don't know what occupational health is supposed to do, but they did fuck all. They did like a report, I think. I don't know. I have more to say and I need to pee, so I'm going to take a quick break and I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. I had a wee, I've had a drink and I've got an extra blanket because I was chilly and maybe I just want the weight. So occupational health weren't going to help me, and like I'd referred myself into the IAPT service, and a really big part of the thing that meant that I didn't do that sooner, even though I knew I was experiencing depression, was that I felt like I should be able to get myself through it, because I'd been a volunteer at this service. I knew about mental health. I had my degree in psychology. I thought I was the shit. And yeah, my life has just been a series of thinking I am the shit, and then looking back with cringe. So I was like, I knew what depression was, and I was correct about that. And like, I had to refer myself in and suddenly become a patient where I'd been a member of staff. And now that feels comfortable to me, but at the time it felt weirdly embarrassing. It wasn't the same staff. Like, no one knew my name. Like, it wasn't calling up the same office for like that I'd been for work, and there was suddenly a patient. And I think now that even would feel different, but at the time I thought it was so embarrassing, and I had just fallen. Like, if I'd been a counsellor for addicts and now I was shooting up, like, and really struggling with my own like drug addiction or something like that. There's no like drug things about like that. I'm teetotal. I don't do any drugs, so I never did any of that. And I think probably that would have just made the whole situation worse, so I'm very glad about that. So yeah, everything kind of going a little bit bad, and then Gishwiz happened. Gishwiz is an online scavenger hunt, and it's a lot of fun, and for our purposes, that's all we need to. I don't know if this is how everyone experiences depression, but I find that if you have our axis of time, moods go up and down. Kind of up, a little bit down, whatever. And that's kind of normal functioning, is like that. And when I was experiencing depression, I'm going to have my axis because it's be easier than just using my hand. This ruler. This is like baseline feel like nothing. This is feel really happy. This is feel really sad. And like when I was starting to go into this state, I kept going from like a kind of spending some time either side of the line to like spending a lot of time down here. And for me, depression comes in as a coping mechanism. So it kind of squished everything. So I got this closer to feeling nothing. And over time that got tighter and tighter and tighter. So I was basically on this level of feeling kind of sort of nothing all the time. Like world in grey. No black and white. Either end just squash right down. And what that does is it means you don't feel the low lows. But it also means you don't get to feel any highs. And as you kind of feel that happening, and I've had depression subsequently as well, more or less the pandemic kicked it off. Some bullying in a different workplace kicked it off. I can kind of feel that happening consciously now. At at the time, this was my first mental health crisis. I didn't know what was going on, but that's what was happening. Gishwas was really, really fun, and it was silly, and it was wholesome, and it was lovely. Google it if you want. It's the greatest international scavenger hunt the world has ever seen. And I spent a week doing really, really fun stuff. And that broke through the top. And when I am depressed, when I've had depression, and something breaks through the top, it breaks the depression collar. And you get to feel the highs, and you plummet into the lows as well. And that's what happened. My worst feelings, my first suicidal thought happened at that time. The times when I went from just crying in the car on the way home to crying on the way there and just going, well, isn't this just a state of things? The fun of that, like, pointed out just how absolutely shit the rest of the time was. And if I'd like said to anybody, it was like, well, I've got like a really good life, but I've just got really a shit job. Like I'm housed, I'm in a stable relationship, I'm, like I'm not food insecure or anything like that. Like everything's fine apart from this job, and it's just so big and it's trapping me in. And one of the things that I had learned that I really liked, that I still really like, is called thought challenging. And I would have these horrific thoughts. The first one knocked me to the floor almost. I was like, where the hell did that thought come from? And then they just became normal. Like, a bad thing happens and it's weird, and then a bad thing happens and it is just par for the course. It's just, yep, all the time getting those kinds of thoughts. Like, why don't you get injured? Why don't you hurt yourself? Why don't you drive your car into traffic? Like, became a thought that I had twice a week maybe when I was driving, and I've described it as very clearly like a very clear kind of thought voice, and that's the same one that I would then use to reply. So they're like, why don't you jump out in front of that car? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, oh no, I don't think we're going to do that. And that really, really helped. And I got to November and I was hiding and I was going into work as late as possible. I think I was in there like 9:30 or 10. I was leaving at like 3:30 or 4. I was in the minimum amount of time possible. And like some people left at 4, so it justified like leaving at 4 or 4:45. And some people got in at 9:30, and I wasn't supposed to be both. I was not doing my hours, and I was lying on my timesheet because I wasn't doing my hours because I didn't want to be there, because being there made me want to hurt myself and die. And I'm not exaggerating that was the case, because this job made me suicidal, and it was literally this job. And so I had the thought go through. I was at pole dancing class on like a Wednesday, and I was sat on the floor because rather than bringing all of the things that I wanted to do and that I was really interested and excited about, I asked the teacher, like, what can I do today? And she was like, I kind of just rely on you to do everything, like to bring your own stuff, because that's sort of what you tend to do, so I don't really know what I can teach you. And I just kind of sat at the bottom of the pole. I didn't really know what to do, and did some stretches, and like that was the last time I went to that pole class. And then like the next week I just spent the evening carving pumpkins because it was Halloween, so I did this one pumpkin carve. And then I think the Friday after Halloween, I had the thought go through my head as I was coming back in the house from work or something like that. I was opening the front door, and I had the thought, which had come through my head all the time, of like, oh, I just want to die. And I'd responded to it in the same way as I had always. I was like, no, you don't. And instead of having the next thought be, no, I don't, it was, yeah, I do. So poor little, like, 22-year-old me was there wanting to die because of her stupid shitty job and her stupid shitty bosses, and more managers just kept getting poured in, and no one was listening, and the space that I could be in was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and I was running out of places to hide. And I was like, I need to go to the doctors. I need to leave this job. And it was like the final act of self-preservation. Because looking back on this time, there were things that I did to keep myself safe. When I didn't think I could drive safely, I did not drive. It was only one time that I fully just refused to drive, when I kept trying to bring comfort and happiness into my life. I kept challenging my thoughts. I referred myself to mental health support, even though it felt really embarrassing and awkward to do so. And in this act of self-preservation, I cozied down in the office with Kate and Sarah and said, I need to phone the doctors because I'm feeling suicidal and no one here will help. And they sat with me, and I called the doctors and I made an appointment for like the following Tuesday morning, and I went in with my head like this, and I sat in the waiting room crying my eyes out like I am now, and I went into the doctor's note and like I think I need to be signed off work. I'm experiencing depression and I don't know what to do, and like the job is just so bad and I can't. And I was so worried that the doctor was going to tell me I couldn't, and I had to go back in. And now I know I could have just not gone in. I could have just not gone in that day, even if the doctor hadn't signed me off. But at the time I didn't know that, because like I was 22. This was only my like second proper job that wasn't holding piercing signs or life modelling or working at a pub. And like, if I saw myself at that time or someone else like that and they were feeling the way I did, just don't go in. Just, you don't have to. It's you can just not. Don't let a job let you feel like that. And the doctor was like, okay, so you signed yourself up to IAPT. I don't want to discuss medication with you unless you've had depression for more than 6 months. I don't think it's beneficial to do that. And the only other option is to sign you off. So fuck you, Emma, for suggesting that I was second guessing the doctor when I knew exactly what was on offer. Fuck you for very many reasons. Not least of which spending a month after I told you I wanted to kill myself before you even thought about sending that occupational health referral. And I think I had to chase you for it. I don't remember, but I think I had to chase it. And I went to my friend's house. And like, one of the ways I'd been hiding was to be texting. She's now my best friend, and I spent all day texting with her and her partner at the time, and they were so lovely, and they've had their own mental health stuff, and they just got it. And they helped me and just distracted me. And the other thing I did was I like just looked on Pinterest. I would just scroll through my phone at memes on Pinterest, because then I would come home and sit with my partner and show them the memes that I had found that day, because I needed anything to just not be where I was, and I needed something to maintain our connection, because I didn't have anything. I needed a third party thing. So the doctor, he signed me off and said, yeah, use this time to search for another job if you think you can. That's a good use of this time. And I felt so much lighter. I felt like I won't say I felt like myself. It took a long time. But I just felt like I had this little glimmer. Like, if depression was like a big wall of fog or a dark piece of fabric that was blocking out all the light and getting smaller and smaller and smaller, we just cut a little hole. We just had a little hole, and I knew I had to put my fingers in and rip it out, and maybe I'd get out of this. Maybe not everything would be good, but this would be maybe over. Maybe you could get out of it. Because the thing about depression is it feels like when you're in it, especially when you're in it for the first time, it feels like you're just going to experience that forever. Like, you're never going to feel joy again. You're always going to be living in this tiny little flat thing of nothing. And this was just that, like, I need to find a fucking job.
I need to find somewhere else. I can't go back. I was so terrified they were going to make me go back. And I would have to go in Swift. I told them I'd been signed off and I sent them my note. And I said, I don't know what to, I just, here's my note. I'm not coming in because I'm signed off. And he just wanted to put stress, and I said, it's depression. Depression is what I have. And I started job searching. And in that 2 weeks, I applied for a job and I got an interview. At just one place. My best friend found the job. I was like, can you help me search? And she was like, yeah. And I said, I found these places. It was where her now partner works. And I got an interview. I got an interview confirmed in that time. And the interview was out of the 2 weeks, so I went to the doctor and I said, can I have another 2 weeks? I really don't want to go back, and I've got a job interview, and if I get it, I won't have to go back to the job. And he said, yeah, I'll extend it. And I sat in that waiting room, waiting to see that it was going to be extended. And I was nervous, but I wasn't. I was crying. I hadn't been crying every day for ages. I phoned up a new pole school because they said, like, I just can't deal with this. Oh, actually, you have to just come and teach yourself bullshit. So I phoned up and I said, can I come and do pole with you? And she was like, yeah, come and do pole with me. I was like, okay. So I went to this new pole school, and I was set myself up for this interview, and I got the job. And I handed in my notice. So I sent my notice in. I told one of my colleagues, who was like, oh, that's weird, I thought you were just off sick. Whatever. She was quite nice, but she wasn't part of the solution, let's put it that way. And I went in and I spoke to, and it wasn't Emma, it was this other person that we'd had. We'd had 2 new people come in. I was going to say her name was Barbara, but it wasn't, because Barbara was someone else. A similar old-fashioned name, and then someone that was a bit younger with a younger name. Maybe Rachel? I don't know. Oh, was it Rachel and Julie? And they were like my managers, so they just came in on me having this massive mental health crisis, and also didn't do anything very helpful. And just contributed to this additional layer of stress and anxiety and depression and politics, and just basically made everything worse, with even less competence. I don't know, whatever. And so I'm going to call it Julie. I don't know if it's her real name. I went in, Julie Blackthorne, maybe? I don't know. And I went in and I had my exit interview with her. I said, do you want an exit interview? And I went, yeah. And I said, this has been a really terrible job, start to finish. Particularly working with Emma, I found her very difficult and very callous. When I was having these problems, she didn't refer me on to occupational health, is like the biggest thing. Initially she was very supportive, or she said she was, and then just nothing came through on that. And the internal politics has been a nightmare. The work is purposefully siloed for some fucking reason, and I will never come back and work here again. This was just the worst. And she kind of sat there smiling at me and went, okay. And it's just like, whatever. It's like, I'm screaming at a wall, but I have some screaming that needs to happen. And I turned up with this hardcore goth makeup because it was Julie that said if you want to have fun hair or piercings or something like that, you should consider going and working in a different profession, like a pub. Yeah, I'll go and work in a pub. You're a careers advisor woman. Or at least she was heading a careers advice team. Fucking brain rot, the lot of them. Toxic brain mold, that's where it started. Sorry, it spread from Hampshire. So yeah, I went in and she'd got me a leaving card because I was leaving. This whole thing took place over 6 months. I got signed off after 6 months, and I spent 1 month signed off and went into a new job. That is how quickly everything went from I'm going to change the world to I want to die. And I'm going to do it. And she gave me this leaving card, and when you leave somewhere and it's been nice, it's crammed with signatures. When you've been somewhere lovely, everybody writes something in your card, and they write something nice even if they've never seen you. They don't know who you are. Just good luck with your future adventures. Signed, Margaret. You've never met me. Good luck. this fucking leaving card. And she knew I was coming in. This wasn't a surprise interview or anything like that. I booked in like a week in advance that I was going to come in and do this exit interview with her and give back my laptop. And she not even everyone in the office that day had signed it. Like there were 7 or 8 people in the office and they had 4 signatures on it. It was like fucking nonsense. And she also spent a lot of time talking about how she'd made sure to get sweets and not chocolate because she knew that I would prefer that. Like, you were exactly incorrect. It's fine. Whatever. I'm leaving. Give me a basket full of scorpions for all I fucking care. I'm going. And so I flipped them the bird and I played Airborne's Running Free on full blast in my car on loop the whole way home. And I took selfies of me rolling around on the floor in my like massive leather jacket, stupid bomber boots, stretching myself into all these weird contorted positions of excitement because God, and I never had to fucking go back ever again, and I haven't. And now if I just go back, it's just going to be to flip up the bird again in person because I have got bolder. And that picture, if you find my Instagram, my profile picture is that picture of me in intense makeup and a leather jacket and new rock boots, contorting on the floor of the living room. I've spoken for 50 minutes and the camera's telling me it doesn't have any more battery or any more storage, so I'm going to put that onto the computer and then I am going to come back and in the next chapters we're going to explore what the hell happened, why did this give me depression. So catch you in part 2. Okay, camera's empty, let's go again. So part 2, why did this happen? Obviously I had a big horrible experience, which was nearly the last experience that I ever had, and I wanted to know why did that happen, and more importantly, how could I stop it, how could I make sure this never happened again. And explanation number 1 is the job sucked. Like, I had a bad time because the job was bad, and that kind of works for some of it. Like, that explains like a grumpiness, that maybe explains a certain amount of like sadness and disillusionment and all of that, but this didn't give all of my colleagues depression. Like, they weren't there crying into their phones on Pinterest for a million hours a day. They weren't hiding, they weren't just curled up on the sofa weeping when they were at home and hating the thought that they'd have to go back into the next day, as far as I'm aware, what they had going on in their private lives was whatever. But it did feel like no one was able to understand me, aside from Kate and Sarah. Solidarity, pals. Explanation number 2. I did not have enough going on outside of work. So, because of patriarchy and my very conservative religious parents, I had this idea of women that you had one of 2 options. Either you had babies and became a mummy, and I didn't want to do that, or you had a career and you were a career woman, and that's what you did, and maybe you had kids and whatever, but you left them with a nanny and you were a career woman. And that was the worst path. That was the one that we weren't supposed to take, but that was the one that I had chosen to take. So as part of that, I had to really dedicate myself to my work, and I had done that to the exclusion of anything happening outside of work, apart from pole dancing and Blaze Bayley gigs. And Blaze Bayley and Warp Speed gigs as well, because they were touring at the same time as well, and they still are. So what was I going to do? I went into my next job and it was at Eastleigh College, and I do want to name check them for being lovely. I was just in such a nice team and everyone was so kind, and I just kept going around waiting for the other shoe to drop, and then it didn't, it was fine. It was lovely. And after I'd been there for like 6 to 8 months, like, it took a long time to feel kind of okay and secure and safe again after that. Like, the damage was done so quickly and the recovery's just, it takes so long, and it's nasty. That's part of the reason why I just wanted to out them for like their names in person and all of that, because of how much of an effect it's had. It's been 9 years and I'm still upset talking about it. So my thought was, if I do a little bit more outside of work and let myself go and do and enjoy things, then if work becomes shit and I'm having a bad time, not everything is tied up in that. Because at the time as well, a lot of my friendships were tied up in work. I had a couple of friends outside, but most of the time, like most of my energy around like being interpersonal was with my colleagues. And when your job is good, that's fine and nice and good, and that's what I'd had with like the past jobs that I'd had. And so it was all kind of good and nice, and we were sharing recipes and talking about things and downloading the same apps and chatting and stuff. So I was like, I need a life outside of it. So I embarked on a Yes Man year, and that really helped. I I think at the time as well, I knew this was a partial explanation, but like this had worked really well. It's like I've got too much of my focus is on work. I need a life outside of work, and that's going to really help. And then like a couple of years later, I went into a job where I was bullied at work by one of the managers, and having stuff going on outside of work was really important, and I was like, really able to advocate like, actually no, that's important to me. So when he was there wanting me to work late, I was like, I have tickets to a gig, I'm going to that gig, I'm driving off, I'm getting on the train to London, and I'm getting to the gig, and I'm going to get home late, and I'm going to come to work before I'm tired, and you can just live with that. And it was really helpful for me to go through that Yes Man process. I made so many friends. I did so many cool things. I went to so many gigs. I got like all into music, and I still do all of the mad things. I ran away with the circus a little bit. I'm still running away with the circus a little bit. And yeah, I went to conferences, and I went to talks, and I went to lectures, and I went and did everything. I went and connected with the outside world, and that was really helpful, and it still is really helpful. That was my partial explanation. And part of this connecting with the outside world and going for it was doing a master's and applying then to go into becoming a therapist. And as part of that, you have to have your own therapy. And when I went in, it was like, well, why are you here? It's like, because I have to be. I have to do therapy, and I don't really know what I want to talk about. So I'm struggling with two things. One is I can never get on top of my housework, and I don't know what's blocking me. And I'm just really stressed that I'm not good at housework, and it's the only thing that causes any kind of argument within our relationship. And I had this period of depression, and I want to work out a way to guarantee that it never happens again. And my first therapist was woefully unequipped for me, which is not her fault. It's fine. It was a bad fit for whatever reason. The next therapist I went to had that same like, okay, let's see what we can do with that. And partway through that therapy, we realised that maybe there was some abuse in my childhood that I hadn't realised. I read an article about narcissistic parents, and I was like, this feels very much like one of my parents, my dad. And this sounds familiar, and we started talking about that. And in that space, I was able to open up a little bit and criticise my dad in a way that I never had before, and to talk about the way that my family members had upset or belittled me when I was younger, and I'm sure they all do to some extent. But it was especially this, like, you're bad and you're wrong, was a message that I'd really internalised from it. And at some point I'm going to spend some more time talking about my parents. Like, that's the other video that's in here, but one at a time. And as part of that, I realised that, and this is an explanation I still use with my clients, it's like something bad happens, and there's two explanations for that we can go to, and one of them is something's bad happening, I'm bad, and it turns into depression, or something bad is happening and you're bad and it turns into anger and violence. You're experiencing some form of injustice, something bad is happening, you feel bad, and it's like, maybe I'm just not good enough, maybe I'm just not being good enough in this scenario. So that was why it became depression, and rather than violence, and that became an important part of that. of that explanation. And the time when I'd had that realization with that therapist and I was able to start having those conversations became incredibly freeing, for like loads of other reasons and stuff. Like I felt like I was able to make my own choices a lot more, and I feel like I'm much further along with that. And that stayed so well. I was able to just choose what I kept and what I wanted to put down from my past, and that was like my tendency to avoid. It was the way that I hid from things when I was a child. I really like psychodynamic approaches. I sought out a psychodynamic therapist and we looked at the way that things had developed and where I was now. I learnt about coping mechanisms, and it was like one of them is avoidance. So I was like, oh, that's me. That's what I was doing. So having that little bit of kind of psychoeducation background and looking at how that applied, that's why it was depression. That's why it manifested in that way. I had 2 further explanations that I wasn't even seeking. Explanation number 3, and this one was a doozy. I watched Philosophy Tube's work, or the 5 jobs I had before YouTube, which was, I think, the last video she made before coming out as trans. And in it, she talks about Bullshit Jobs, a book by David Graeber, which I thought, that sounds interesting. I'm gonna read that. Sometimes that's how I watch video essays, like, I'm gonna read some more into that. The job was a bullshit job. So, like, Bullshit Jobs is, like, and I'll go through more of it. It's like, there are jobs that people have where they just, like, the job doesn't need to be done, but you get hired in for some other random bullshit reason. So, like, one of the examples in the book is if you're an accountant and you're, like, a freelance accountant and you have enough capacity to do all of your own admin, like, the logical thing is you do all your own admin. But if you want to make yourself seem more impressive in order to market yourself to more people, you might want someone else to answer your phone, and that'll make you seem, like, more busy and impressive and important. So you hire a person to answer your phone, even though that, like, there isn't enough work for them to do, and they spend most of the time sat around going, what am I doing? Why the heck am I here? This job does not need to be done. And while that sounds like a lot of fun, that is soul destroying. And that's what the fucking job was. It was bullshit. And I only realised it so much later on. I was like, I was in a bullshit job. And people come at this and they feel really depressed because you want your work to be meaningful and important. And when you know that it's not, because part of being in a bullshit job is, like, either consciously or subconsciously you know. I knew I was in a bullshit job, like, subconsciously. And then when it came to, like, my knowledge, I was like, oh, that's why. It could have taken out anyone like this. Loads of people experience this. And anytime I've spoken about, like, my mental health issues, and anytime I've brought it up with people individually or I've posted about it online or anything like that, I get so many people saying, like, I have had my own mental health struggles, I feel the same, I understand. And there's not the explanation that I might have had, because maybe that would have been my parents' reaction. In fact, it was, of just like, mental health, it's all rubbish. Depression isn't real. It doesn't exist. Because I opened up to my dad in, like, the November saying I've actually had a really tough time. I had really depression. He was like, oh, well, hopefully you'll sort it out soon. And it's just like, die in a well. Like, gave him another glass of wine and he was shut up again. But yeah, he's pretty bad. So this job was a bullshit job, and there are different types of bullshit job. And the 2 types that this was, one is we were a duct taper, which is the example they use in the book is there is a leak in the roof, and so somebody puts a bucket underneath to catch the drips. Makes sense. But then instead of hiring a roof fixer, they hire a bucket emptier. So this person's job is to get the bucket, swap it out when it's full, and go and empty the bucket. And that's their job. And, like, it's stupid, it's pointless, just fix the roof. And, like, within loads of systems there's that, like, oh yeah, I need to go through and, like, edit this thing, this one little stage, so that this talks to this, rather than just making a tiny bit of code that replaces me entirely. And so we were the duct taper in that spreadsheet situation, where it's like, we could fix it. Like, no, we don't want to fix it. We don't want to change things statistically between like the data team so that our unknown list becomes nothing, or like way less or whatever. We want you to do the work. We want to hire somebody to fucking cold call teenagers and go and knock on their doors and ask them what they're doing and worry them. Like, some people responded really nicely to that and were like, oh, I'm so glad that you're phoning and making sure that we're okay. Like, we are, thanks. And some people were like, are you going to come and take me out of college? Like, is there a problem with my registration or anything like that? It's like, no, we just needed to check. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. So they had us as duct tapers. And the other thing, and I cannot prove this, but I with all my heart believe it to be true, the main manager of the team that I worked for, the Hampshire Futures like director, was due to retire. And it's difficult for me to understand or explain, but everyone knew that Emma, who had been my boss, was like pegged to be the replacement. I'm gonna say that maybe it like came through with like cliques, like that it was Emma, Barbara, and this woman, and like they were all like really on each other's side and like had each other's backs. So it wasn't a surprise when she was announced, and it wasn't because she was in like the deputy position and just like got bumped up. Like, it could have equally been a bunch of other people or someone external. Like, that would have been normal, but like everyone knew, and so when she was promoted it was like, yeah, I knew she was always going to be promoted. And in order to get promoted into a role in the council, you need to fulfil their essential and desirable criteria as outlined in the job specification, and it also has to be advertised internally, and they have to go through an interview process, even if there's somebody internally who's really qualified, in order to try and stop this kind of bullshit activity. And I suspect that Emma didn't have enough management experience to fulfill the criteria well, but they already knew that they wanted someone to go in. They wanted her to go in to that position. So I became a goon. I became that receptionist that was just there to make her look impressive. That's why they hired a team of 8 people when they didn't need 8 people. That's why they just had us doing literally whatever, because our job wasn't to do anything. Our job was to be managed. Explanation just made everything feel better. It's not just like, that's why they didn't want us fixing systems, because it gave us something to do. That's why they didn't want us talking to senior managers, because it would make it obvious that we had nothing to do. That's why they didn't want us talking to the other teams, because it might be obvious that we have nothing to do. That's why they didn't want me to leave, because I needed to be there and be managed. And that explained why the first meeting of, hi, I'm really depressed, was, I am going to be compassionate, and the second meeting was like, fuck you. Because the first, like, if a story of, I had a staff member who was experienced mental health issues, and internally through my own compassion I made it better, is really great for an interview and for furthering your career. But I had a staff member who was depressed, and they were really depressed, and then they got signed off, and I had to refer them to occupational health, and they left going, fuck you, Emma, and 9 years later they made a video about it when they named me because they were still so mad about it. That's not great. She wanted me to shut up and be better. Like I made you better. You're better now. You don't have mental health problems anymore. I fixed them. So yeah. And I was just a person to be managed. It didn't matter what I was doing. It didn't matter what I felt. It didn't even matter if I was turning up. And honestly, if I'd known that at the time, I would have gone off and done literally any fucking other thing. Gone and worked in another office. Like, oh, we expected you in this office. Oh, I was in the other office. Like, the sleepover thing. It's a bullshit job. They just needed me to be there. I think they probably needed me to be there on paper. And that's like when they just wanted me to sit down and shut up. Like, just go home. Just don't be here. You don't have to make yourself come here. I know you care about young people and that you want to do something valuable and good in your life and get some experience so that you can go further in your career, but just be here and be managed and sit down and be quiet. And that's why that job was so soul destroying, because they are. That's what a bullshit job is. No matter how much money you're being paid, no matter how, like, anything else that's going on, the job, it was bullshit. There was no job. We were just there to be managed and do busy work. And then I got another explanation. Like that felt like everything. Like I had a tendency towards depression because of the way that my dad is and the way that I learnt to be, in order to kind of get on with the world, just go run and hide. And when I couldn't run and hide, I didn't have anything else to call upon. I didn't have any other coping mechanisms. And when I was in the job wasn't real, and some part of me knew that, and it was fighting against it because I was 22 and wanted to change the world. And honestly, I'm 32 and I want to change the world. And I still want to make it better. And it was just like a bad place for it. It was worse than just having no effect. It was being told that you shouldn't even try. Like, it wasn't just that I couldn't make things better. It was I was being told I needed to just sit down and shut up. And there's a reason why it hit me, not just because of that avoidance thing of my parents, which is still kind of an ongoing question. My final explanation for what happened is that I might be neurodivergent. And so that thing of like, I just don't understand is the thing that I've come up quite a lot in my life because of that. I'm going through the process at the moment. I got referred on to the autism service, so like the GP thought I was autistic enough to pass me along, but it's going to be another somewhere between 6 to 8. It's going to be like another 18 months, I think. I think it was about like at some point in the summer that I referred, so like 18 months to 2 years before I get seen and have any kind of diagnosis. So this is just going off my own. That kind of fits. That makes a lot of things make sense. Let's get this investigated and see what happens. And that the way that this manifests, at least for me, is when I don't understand something, I ask questions. And like, there's a thing for if someone makes a racist joke or a sexist joke, instead of telling them off, you just ask them to explain it. And that makes them really uncomfortable because it means they have to own up to the fact that they've just done a racism. So saying like, oh, it's because that's how so-and-so people are, ha ha ha. And you're like, I don't get it, why is that funny? And that's specifically touted as a tactic. And I've realised myself, and possibly other autistic people, do that without realising. So it's like, oh, what's the job? It's this. Okay, what does that really mean? It's this. Shut up, stop asking. But I want to know. I need to know. I don't understand. Explain it to me. And they couldn't tell me. We've just hired you to be managed. Shut up and sit down. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. Just do it quietly and don't make any waves. But I think that was the real answer, and they couldn't give me that, so I just sat there going like, what's going on? And they were just going like, everything is fine, please stop asking. And yeah, I'm thinking as well that might be why that affected me more than it affected my colleagues, because I knew that I was weird. I knew that I was weird in that environment, and like, I'm in a lot of places where I know I'm weird and unusual and like different things, and I was just really interested in people and what they were doing. And it's like, what did you do last night? And nothing. Like, you cease to exist between the hours of 5 and 8 a.m. Like, you're my only social contact. This is incredibly unhealthy. Please help. But yeah, it's just I couldn't cope with it, so I just wanted to run away and hide. And when I couldn't, I got really sad, and it all just turned in on me, and I just assumed that it was me, that I was just there being a weird kid that didn't know what was going on and didn't know why no one else was freaking out about it. We had some more people hired into that team. Like, they wanted to have 8, and it was me and one other person starting, and then we had like a couple more people got hired in while I was there. One of the guys was there just going, it was just bullshit. Like, I hate this job. I don't know why we're doing this, and was equally as frustrated. And like, I hope you're doing well. I'm not going to name him, but like, I hope you're okay. And turns out bullshit was in fact the technical term. It was a bullshit job. So coming out of all of that, and that's like explanations that have come to me, like including up to this year. And I was thinking like, oh, when I when I got to the bullshit jobs one, I was like, I feel like my explanation is complete. And then there was like this neurodivergence question. And now it feels like maybe I am going to be reflecting on this experience for many more years to come. It may be something that I reflect on for the rest of my life as part of my like therapy journey and life experience. Maybe it's never going away. Maybe forever I will be haunted by fucking four chimneys, offices, and Emma Gott's not referring me to occupational health. Maybe that's going to sit there in my head that someone was just a massive dickhead to me, and it made me really, really sad. But the question that I came to therapy initially with was, how do we make sure I never have it happen again? I think there's no guarantee. But I can say that every subsequent experience of depression I've had has felt more knowable. I've kind of known what was going on. I've not always been able to stop it, but it's never been that bad. And the times when work was bad, I knew I could get signed off. I knew there were services available. I had more and more techniques to keep myself safe rather than just going on my phone and being on Pinterest the whole time. And if I'm on Pinterest looking at memes, I know I'm feeling really unwell. And if I'm avoiding and hiding and being reminded of times when I've been bullied and belittled and made to feel small and wanting to hide, which is easy when you're small, I get out of those situations much quicker. I was really stressed out about a job that I had in 2018, and it was starting to feel a bit worrying, and I saw I had the life outside of it, so not everything was attached to work, and that's been really helpful going through subsequent burnout mental health crisis, which I'm towards the end of. I think at the moment I'm starting to get better again. You go into depression knowing that you won't always feel this way. There is a way out. You get those feelings of being trapped, and one of the big thoughts that I had as I came out was, I'm never going to let a job make me feel like this again. And when that bullying and when that depression came in, and I went and I got myself signed off much quicker, I almost felt embarrassed that I'd let myself get into that situation again, which in hindsight for now feels very dumb because I was being bullied at work by my boss, who was being a dickhead and actively gaslighting me. Fun times. Fuck you too, Aaron, just if you're here thinking that the worst job ever was you. It wasn't, but you were still pretty shit. And I left that job even though the timing was terrible and it was bad and it made me feel bad, and I just left. I left and I went into a really nice job for 3 months, and thankfully as well, every time I've left a bad job I've been caught by really lovely people and a really supportive environment, and actually everywhere I've gone I found good colleagues, even if I had to go and find them in the basement of our inaccessible building that we were in. Like there've been people everywhere. And you get older and you have more life experiences, and I think that helps too, because you see more, like, you just know more about the world a little bit, and you put different importance on things, and you feel like I feel a lot more confident, settled in myself now, 10 years on, than I did at the time. I felt like I had so much more to prove, and still feel like I've got stuff to prove, but it's way less. I feel like I've proved it in many ways. And yeah, I have other coping mechanisms now that I know what the explanations are, now that I know how I got there. I have more ways of dealing with it, which aren't just biscuits and hoodies, but also biscuits and hoodies were a good try. Like, looking back at my past self, and I just want to like send a little cuddle back through time to be like, you were trying your best. And yeah, got braver. I would have confronted it a lot sooner. I would have done another naked resignation and phoned up a temp agency and was just like, help, get me out. if I had that situation, like not exactly the same situation, I was suddenly like transplanted back into it. Fucking heaven forbid. I would just not go in. I wouldn't go in, and I would just dodge all the emails and calls. Like, whatever. Fire me. See if I care. And just keep collecting the money. Which sounds like a terrible use of public money, but also the whole job was a terrible use of public money. May as well just have me at home reading books and knitting. It's nice to get all of that out. That's been kind of sat in the back of my brain for a while. So, moral of the story. Depression sucks. If your work ever makes you feel like killing yourself, get a different job. And therapies are very good and life-changing, which is something I feel like I should have believed before I started going into a career as a therapist, but it's good that I know it now. Stay safe. Look after yourselves. And a little bit on resources for suicide prevention if you're in the UK. The Samaritans is always free to call, and everywhere, and they will just sit and listen to you talk, even if you are just upset. You don't need to be suicidal to talk to them. If you're feeling suicidal but it's not immediate and urgent, go and talk to your GP. You can also self-refer to your local improving access to psychological therapies service. If you're in other countries, there's probably other stuff around. If you just Google suicide prevention hotline, I'm sure there is a number there that you can call. Look after yourself with cakes and biscuits and Pinterest and whatever you need. And if you're going through the dark times, sometime you'll turn into this, maybe 10 years later. You'll be laughing about the bullshit jobs, flipping the juice at the people that made your life hell.